Hi, today we'll discuss circuit leaks, focusing on the multiple ways that we can detect them. A circuit leak is the generic term describing a situation in which some of the gas delivered by the ventilator escapes from the system, hence not returning back to the ventilator. I'd like to start with an important clinical point. The presence of a leak does not equal a cuff leak. Leaks can arise, for example, due to loose connections in the circuit. They can arise from an upward migration of the ET tube, so the cuff is herniating through the cords, a poorly inflated or even ruptured cuff, or from a fistulous connection between the airways or alveoli and the pleural space. In this last case, a leak is generally more obvious when the pleural space is being evacuated by a chest tube. When I suspect the presence of a leak, I will bring my ears close to the patient and carefully listen for any gurgling from the patient's mouth, which would indicate an abnormal seal of their airways by the cuff, or air escaping between circuit pieces, which would indicate that they're not tightly connected. There are several ways in which you can detect a leak on the ventilator. One way is to look at a mismatch between delivered or inhaled and returned or exhaled tidal volumes. If there is a leak, naturally the delivered tidal volumes will be greater than the return volumes. Note how in this case, where the mainstream and tidal CO2 sensor was loosely connected to the circuit, inhaled or delivered volumes in red are 600 mL, but returned or exhaled volumes in blue are only 400 mL. The graphic representation of these numbers can be seen in the volume versus time graph highlighted in orange. The ascending limb of the volume-time graph represents how much volume was delivered. So in this breath, pointed by the arrow, that would be roughly 600 mL. The descending limb represents how much volume was returned. Note in this case that after going down from a peak of 600, the descending limb plateaus at around 200. This is because only 400 mL returned to the ventilator, since the other 200 leaked. When a new inspiration starts, the graph does a sharp reset, so we can start measuring delivered volumes from zero again. This sharp reset, pointed by the white arrow, is often called the square root sign, and is a quick and easy way to detect the presence of a leak. The height of the sharp reset will also tell us about the severity of the leak. Note how the sharp reset disappears and the difference between inhaled and exhaled volumes almost disappear after we tighten the loose pieces of the circuit. The same graphic information can be obtained in the flow time graph in a slightly different way. Look at this case of a patient with esophageal cancer who underwent resection that was complicated by a tracheal-pleural fistula. You can see on chest X-ray the presence of a pneumothorax that was actively being drained by a chest tube. On the ventilator, you can see the same sharp reset now in yellow on the volume time curve. On the white flow time curve, note how the area under the curve on the inspiratory portion of the waveform is larger than on the expiratory portion. The area under the curve of the flow time graph equals tidal volumes. So this discrepancy is just another sign that inspiratory or delivered volumes are larger than returned or expiratory volumes. Look how once we intentionally advance the endotracheal tube to the left mainstem bronchus, bypassing the fistula, the area under the curve between the inspiratory and expiratory portions of the flow time waveform are more similar to each other. One additional sign of a leak may be seen during an inspiratory hold. During an inspiratory hold, we have delivered the tidal volume and the ventilator closes both inspiratory and expiratory valves. The airway pressures measured during a hold should be a function of both lung and chest wall compliance, as well as the volume in the lungs. Since both inspiratory and expiratory valves are closed, airway pressures are constant, forming a plateau. However, if there is a leak somewhere in the circuit, airway pressures during an inspiratory hold maneuver will not plateau. Instead, they will progressively drop as gas leaks from the system. Hence, a progressive drop in airway pressures with an inspiratory hold should also alert you for a leak. Note on the bottom left of the screen that the ventilator will estimate a percent leak by comparing inhaled and exhaled volumes. Look how in this case of a cuff leak, by inflating the cuff, airway pressures actually plateau during an inspiratory hold. One last important point to make is that some mismatch between inhaled and exhaled tidal volumes, as you can see pointed by the white arrow here, can also be seen with dynamic hyperinflation. Expiratory flows that don't go back to baseline, a plateau that does not continuously drop, and the presence of auto-PEEP on an end expiratory hold suggests at least a component of dynamic hyperinflation explaining the difference, not only a leak. This is it for today. Next week, we'll discuss how we can gain insight into respiratory system mechanics from waveform analysis. I'll see you then.